I didn't know my life was about to split cleanly in two that night. There was lipstick smudged at the corner of his collar, faint but unmistakable, like someone had dragged their fingers through it and thought no one would notice. And then there was the scent, sharp, expensive cologne, masculine, not mine, not anything we owned. He barely looked at me when he came home, just dropped his bag by the door, muttered something about being exhausted, and walked straight past me toward the stairs. In 18 years of marriage, Daniel had always greeted me, always kissed my cheek, always asked how my day went before launching into his own, always met my eyes. That night, nothing. I stood in the kitchen, frozen, listening to the sound of the shower starting upstairs. Water rushed through the pipes, loud in the silence of the house, and something cold settled deep in my chest. Not panic, not rage, certainty. I tried to talk myself out of it, told myself I was tired, paranoid, that long marriages go through phases, that trust means not jumping to conclusions. But my body knew before my mind was willing to admit it. I went back into my home office and opened our shared calendar, the one we'd used for years to coordinate the kids, work trips, client meetings, birthdays. I scrolled slowly. No networking event, no mixer, no investor dinner, nothing. I opened his work email next. He'd given me access years ago, back when we talked about business continuity, like responsible adults building something together. I wasn't snooping, I was checking. No invitations, no confirmations, no meetings that justified his late nights. That was when the quiet suspicion turned into something heavier. The next morning, I acted normal. I made breakfast, poured coffee, asked Daniel about his day. He sat at the table scrolling through his phone, barely present. Mentioned a client meeting at 10, lunch with an investor, said he'd probably be late again. Our oldest, Sophie, came down with her backpack slung over one shoulder. 16, sharp, observant. Her eyes flicked between us, and I could tell she felt it, that something was off. But she said nothing. Tyler thundered in next, 13 and perpetually hungry, grabbing toast without sitting. Madison was still upstairs, probably changing outfits for the third time. After everyone left, I did something I never imagined I would do. I called my brother, and that was the moment everything became real. I was 41 years old when my marriage started unraveling, though the truth is, it had been fraying quietly long before that night. My name is Claire. I'm not dramatic by nature. I build systems. I solve problems. For most of my adult life, that's how I approached everything: work, marriage, motherhood. If something was broken, I believed it could be fixed with enough effort, enough patience, enough love applied in the right places. Daniel and I met in our early 20s, back when everything still felt possible and nothing felt permanent. We were both ambitious, both a little intense, both convinced we were different from other couples. He was charismatic, confident in a way that drew people in effortlessly. I was quieter, steadier, the kind of woman who listened more than she spoke, and he loved that about me. Or at least he said he did. We built our life together piece by piece. We married young, grew up inside the marriage, learned how to fight and forgive and compromise. When the kids came, Sophie first, then Tyler, then Madison, our world narrowed and expanded all at once. Sleep deprivation, school lunches, late-night feedings, soccer practices, parent-teacher meetings. The chaos felt normal. The exhaustion felt earned. The company came later. We started it together, turning late-night conversations at the kitchen table into a real business. Daniel was the face, the meetings, the pitches, the networking. I was the structure. Contracts, systems, finances, operations. We were good at it. Better than good. The company grew steadily, and so did our sense of pride. We told ourselves we were lucky, and in many ways, we were. But somewhere along the way, things shifted. Daniel started traveling more, or at least saying he was. Dinners got shorter, conversations became logistical instead of intimate. He stopped asking how I felt and started asking what needed to be done. We became efficient partners instead of lovers, and I told myself that was normal after 18 years and 3 kids. I ignored the small things, the way he guarded his phone like it contained state secrets, the way he stayed out later on Wednesdays, always Wednesdays, the new clothes, the gym obsession, the sudden interest in cologne. I noticed them, registered them, and then filed them away under "don't be paranoid." His family never helped. Daniel's parents had always believed he could do no wrong. His mother praised him constantly, openly, as if he were still a golden child instead of a middle-aged man with responsibilities. His sister treated our marriage like a business arrangement I should be grateful for, not a partnership I had earned. Whenever I expressed frustration, it was framed as me being too sensitive, too demanding, too focused on control. So I softened. I compromised. I shrank myself in places where I should have stood firm. By the time the late nights became routine, I was already used to being second. Still, I believed in us. I believed in the history, in the vows, in the life we had built. I believed that marriages don't explode, they erode, and that if I paid attention, I could stop the damage before it became fatal. What I didn't understand yet was this. By the time you start questioning reality, someone else has already rewritten it. And Daniel had been rewriting ours for months. I just hadn't caught up yet. Once the doubt took root, I couldn't unsee it. Every interaction with Daniel felt slightly off, like a familiar room where someone had moved the furniture just enough to make you uneasy. Nothing obvious. Nothing I could point to and say, this is it. Just a steady accumulation of moments that no longer fit the story I was telling myself. He stopped being present even when he was physically there. At dinner, his eyes stayed glued to his phone. When I spoke, he nodded without really listening, murmuring agreement at the wrong moments. If I asked a follow-up question, he'd blink, like he'd been pulled out of another world. Wednesdays became sacred and untouchable. Client dinners, he'd say casually, already halfway out the door. Investors like late meetings. This deal could change everything for us. For us. But he never invited me anymore. Never asked my opinion. Never talked through the strategy the way he used to. The company, the thing we built together, slowly became something he owned and I merely supported. His family noticed too, in their own way. At a dinner with his parents, his mother joked about how lucky I was that Daniel was still so desirable. His sister laughed and said, "Men like him get bored. It's just biology." Daniel smiled instead of correcting them. I sat there, fork paused halfway to my mouth, realizing no one at that table was on my side. The kids felt it before I was ready to admit it. Sophie started hovering, lingering in doorways, watching us like she was studying for an exam she didn't want to take. Tyler became louder, more restless, acting out in small ways. Madison asked innocent questions that cut deeper than accusations. Why doesn't Daddy eat with us anymore? Why does Daddy work so late? Did we do something wrong? I kept covering for him, smiling, making excuses, teaching my children that silence was safer than truth. And then there were the smells. The unfamiliar cologne, the hotel soap, the faint trace of something that didn't belong in our house. I'd catch it on his clothes, his skin, the car, and my stomach would tighten before my brain could intervene. I didn't accuse him, not yet. I asked questions instead. Are you okay? You seem tired. Is something stressing you out? He brushed me off with practiced ease. You're overthinking. It's just work. Can we not do this right now? This became a forbidden word. Any attempt to reconnect, to clarify, to reach him emotionally. If I pushed too hard, he withdrew further. If I stayed quiet, he disappeared anyway. So I watched. I paid attention. I noticed that his calendar suddenly had blocked time instead of details, that our company card expenses were increasing without explanation, that he stopped coming home on Wednesday nights before midnight. And I remembered my brother's voice, calm and grounded from the night I called him. Don't jump. Document. Patterns matter more than feelings. The worst part wasn't the fear of betrayal. It was the slow realization that I was already alone in the marriage. That whatever Daniel was doing, he had been doing it without me for a long time. And I was finally ready to stop pretending I didn't see it. I didn't confront Daniel right away. That surprised even me. Instead, I did something far more dangerous. I stayed calm. The next morning, I woke up before everyone else, moved through the kitchen like nothing inside me had shifted. I made coffee, packed lunches, kissed Madison's hair when she finally came downstairs, smiled at Sophie, reminded Tyler about his practice. Daniel sat at the table, scrolling through his phone, barely present. I watched him the way you watch someone you're about to lose, not with desperation, but with a strange, detached clarity. Like my body had stepped back to let my mind take control. When the house emptied, the silence felt heavier than usual. I went into my office and opened our financial dashboard. Everything was joint. It always had been. For tax purposes, transparency, trust. The words felt almost ironic now. At first, nothing jumped out. Then I narrowed the search. Travel expenses, client entertainment, Wednesdays. There it was. Hotel charges in Phoenix. Not business hotels, but boutique places, romantic places. The kind of hotels with mood lighting and wine lists longer than their room service menus. 5 transactions over 6 weeks. Always Wednesdays. Always billed to the company card. My hands didn't shake. I opened the receipts. Dinners for 2. Expensive wine. Candlelit restaurants nowhere near any client office. All categorized as business development, tax deductible, smart, calculated. Except I knew with absolute certainty that we had no clients in those locations. I started documenting everything. Photographs, screenshots, dates, amounts, patterns. Then I checked his personal calendar on his laptop, the one he forgot I had access to. Every Wednesday for 2 months, he'd blocked off personal time from 5 in the evening until midnight. Personal. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen, the room suddenly too quiet. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This wasn't intuition. This was fact. By the time I pulled out our company partnership agreement, my hands finally trembled. Not from fear, but from the weight of what I was about to do. I remembered drafting that clause years ago, insisting on it while Daniel laughed and called me paranoid. An infidelity clause, buyout provisions, protection in case one partner used company resources to violate the marriage and the business. I had written it for a future I never thought would come. I waited until Friday. Daniel came home from yoga, hair damp, wearing expensive workout clothes he'd bought recently. The kids were already gone. Sophie had driven Tyler and Madison to school. 40 minutes. Just us. He poured coffee and leaned against the counter, phone in hand. "Can we talk?" I said. He barely looked up. "Is this about Rachel Chen?" His hand froze mid-scroll. Just for a second. That was all I needed. I sat down at the kitchen table, folded my hands, and told him calmly that I knew about the Prescott Hotel, the Wednesday nights, the $7,000 of company money he'd spent over 2 months on someone who wasn't his wife. The color drained from his face. He tried to recover, confusion first, then denial. "I don't know what you're talking about." I slid the folder across the table. Hotel receipts, restaurant charges, GPS logs from the company car, dates, times, even the wine he ordered. He stared at it like it might disappear if he didn't touch it. Then he got defensive, accused me of spying, of invading his privacy, of being controlling. I corrected him calmly, told him I'd reviewed our business expenses, something any 50% partner had the legal right to do. "What I found," I said evenly, "is my husband stealing from our company to fund an affair." He stood up, tried to leave. I told him not to insult me by lying anymore. I told him I had everything. That was when the mask finally dropped. He got angry, loud, accusatory, said I hadn't touched him in over a year, that I only cared about work, the kids, the house, that he felt invisible in his own marriage. I listened without interrupting. Then I stood, poured myself more coffee, and told him exactly what was going to happen next. And for the first time since this began, he looked afraid. I didn't raise my voice. That seemed to unsettle him more than anything else I could have done. Daniel stood there, breathing hard, hands clenched, waiting for me to explode, to scream, to cry, to collapse into the version of a betrayed wife he could dismiss as emotional. When it didn't happen, his confidence faltered. I told him I'd already spoken to my brother. His eyes flicked up sharply. About what? About protecting myself and our children. The word children landed heavily between us. He laughed once, harsh and disbelieving. You're really going to do this? Throw 18 years away over a mistake? I looked at him and felt something settle into place. This wasn't shock or grief. It was clarity. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary, I said quietly. You made choices, repeatedly. You lied, you stole, you built a second life and financed it with our business. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I told him he would call Rachel and tell her it was over, permanently, because I would be filing for divorce, that he needed to pack and be out by Sunday evening, that he could stay with his sister. He froze. You're serious? His voice dropped. Claire, we have kids, a company, a life. I know, I said. I built it with you. He started bargaining, counseling, time, promises, tears. When that didn't work, he turned cruel, said his father would destroy me, that I couldn't just kick him out of his own company, that I'd regret this. I reminded him of the partnership agreement he signed, the one with the infidelity clause he mocked at the time, the one that triggered an immediate buyout at a discounted valuation if company resources were used to fund an affair. His face went white. You talked to your brother about this? He whispered. Yes. For how long? For as long as I needed to. That was when he finally understood. This wasn't a threat. This wasn't an emotional reaction. This was a decision. He tried one last angle, the kids. Said they didn't need to know, that we could tell them we grew apart, that we could be civil. I agreed, which was why I expected him to leave quietly, because if he forced me to explain to Sophie why her father destroyed this family, I would tell the truth, calmly, clearly, without protecting him from his own choices. That shut him down. That afternoon, after he locked himself in the bedroom, I sat Sophie down in my office. She already knew something was wrong. She always did. I told her the truth. Not every detail, just enough. Her father and I were getting divorced because he'd been unfaithful, and I wasn't willing to stay in a marriage without honesty. I watched her process it. Confusion turning into understanding, understanding into anger. She told me she'd noticed. The late Wednesdays, the distance. She thought we were just stressed. I apologized. She told me not to. That night, I sat Tyler and Madison down together, explained simply, reassured them, promised them stability even when I wasn't sure I believed it myself. By Sunday evening, Daniel was gone. 3 suitcases. No goodbye to the kids, just absence. Sophie found me in the garage, organizing tools I didn't need to organize. Is he really gone? She asked. I nodded. She said quietly, good. And for the first time since this began, I realized I wasn't broken. I was free. Freedom didn't come quietly. It arrived with noise, with consequences that rippled outward, touching everything Daniel and I had ever built together. Monday morning hit like a wall. I was back in my office, staring at spreadsheets that suddenly felt heavier than numbers. The company didn't pause because my marriage had collapsed. Payroll still had to run. Clients still expected answers. Employees still trusted me to be steady. I told myself I could handle both. Then my assistant knocked. Someone's here to see you, she said, her voice careful. She says it's urgent. Her name is Rachel Chen. For a moment, my body betrayed me. Heat rushed to my face, then drained away, leaving me cold and focused. I told her to send her in. Rachel walked into my office like she belonged there. Tall, polished, expensive confidence stitched into every movement. She smiled and extended her hand. I didn't take it. She lowered it slowly, sat down without being invited, and said we needed to talk. She introduced herself as the VP of Technology at Morrison Industries, the Fortune 500 company reviewing our biggest proposal of the year. The room tilted. She'd been evaluating my work for 3 weeks, she said, complimented the proposal, mentioned, casually, that Daniel had been helping her understand our capabilities during their meetings. I stood up, walked around my desk, and closed the door. I told her my personal life and professional life were separate, that if she wanted to evaluate our proposal, she could do so objectively. But if she thought she could leverage her relationship with my husband to manipulate a deal, she was making a serious mistake. Her smile faltered. She said she was just trying to be honest, professional, woman to woman. I stepped closer. A professional doesn't sleep with a married man, I said calmly. And she doesn't use business leverage to provoke the person she wronged. She stood up, accused me of taking it personally. I am taking it personally, I replied, because you made it personal. I told her to leave my office. I warned her that if the Morrison deal collapsed because of this conflict of interest, I would make sure every executive in Phoenix knew exactly why. She left without another word. I sat down, hands shaking just slightly, and called my brother. That evening, the house exploded emotionally. Madison locked herself in her room, crying so hard Sophie couldn't reach her. Tyler went quiet in that way that scares me more than anger ever could. I sat on Madison's bed, held her small body against mine while she sobbed, asking if Daddy was coming back, asking if she'd done something wrong. I told her the truth, the child-safe version of it, that none of this was her fault, that adults sometimes make choices that hurt people, that living apart didn't mean loving her less. Tyler hovered in the doorway, trying to be strong. I pulled him into the hug too, and we stayed like that until Madison fell asleep. Later, Sophie told me Daniel had called, wanting to talk to the kids. I said, okay. Sophie admitted she didn't want to talk to him. Asked if that made her a bad daughter. I told her no, that emotions don't follow rules, that anger doesn't make her cruel, silence doesn't make her heartless. 2 days later, my brother called again. He asked if I remembered the money we'd been saving for the move to Seattle. $75,000. Years of sacrifice, extra contracts, late nights. It's gone, he said. Daniel had transferred it to a personal account 2 weeks before I confronted him. I sat down hard. That money wasn't just savings. It was our future. The kids knew about it. Sophie had already toured colleges there. I drove to his sister's house where he'd been staying. She looked uncomfortable when she opened the door, said he wasn't there. I told her calmly that Daniel had taken money meant for our children's future. Her face fell. She said he'd told her it was his money, that I was trying to freeze him out. I told her the truth about the timing, about the affair, about the planning. She didn't argue. That night, Sophie showed me something on her phone. Daniel had posted a photo with Rachel, wine glasses raised, smiling. The caption read, "New beginnings. Sometimes you have to let go of the past to embrace your future." It was public. Sophie was humiliated. Her friends were asking questions, whispering. I held her while she cried and told her this wasn't her shame to carry. The next morning, the call came from Morrison Industries, not from Rachel. From the CEO, she told me Rachel no longer worked there, that conflicts of interest and unprofessional conduct weren't tolerated, that my proposal was still under review. I hung up and felt nothing. No triumph. No relief. Just inevitability. By the end of the week, my children weren't just watching the fallout. They were standing inside it with me. And I knew then this wasn't over. It was only getting louder. The lowest point didn't come with shouting or chaos. It came quietly, late at night, when the house finally went still. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the sink full of dishes I didn't remember using. The hum of the refrigerator, the only sound keeping me company. My body felt hollow, not numb, not panicked, just emptied out, like something essential had been scooped from my chest and taken away. That was when it hit me. Not the betrayal, not the divorce, not even the money. It was the weight of holding everything together alone. All day long, I was strong. I answered emails like nothing had changed. I signed contracts. I reassured employees. I listened to my kids. I told them we'd be okay until the words sounded rehearsed, even to me. But at night, when no one needed me, the silence pressed in. I thought about the woman I'd been before all this, the one who believed that loyalty was mutual, that building something together meant protecting it together. I wondered when exactly I'd started disappearing from my own marriage, shrinking myself to keep peace, swallowing instincts to avoid conflict. The worst thought crept in slowly. What if I'd stayed too long? Madison had cried herself to sleep again that night. Tyler barely spoke at dinner, pushing food around his plate, his shoulders hunched like he was bracing for impact. Sophie tried to act mature, tried to be my ally, but I could see the cracks, the anger she didn't know where to put. And Daniel was out there somewhere, living freely, posting photos, rewriting the narrative. I sat at the kitchen table and let the tears come for the first time. Not dramatic sobs, just quiet, shaking breaths that hurt my ribs. Tears dripping onto folded hands. I wasn't mourning the marriage anymore. I was mourning the time. 18 years of trust, of effort, of choosing someone who had chosen himself in the end. I questioned everything. Was I too focused on the kids? Too practical? Too steady to be exciting? I hated myself for even asking those questions, for letting his justifications echo in my head. The darkest thought came last. Maybe this is my fault. That was when Sophie found me. She stood in the doorway, backpack still on, watching me cry like she'd never seen before. Her face crumpled instantly. "Mom," she whispered, rushing toward me. I tried to wipe my face, tried to pull myself together, but she wrapped her arms around me tightly, fiercely, like she was holding something together with sheer will. "You didn't do anything wrong," she said, her voice breaking. "He did. He chose this." Hearing it from my daughter, not as comfort, but as certainty, broke something open inside me. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of a house that no longer felt whole. I felt small, exposed, exhausted. And for the first time since this began, I wasn't sure I had anything left to give. I wasn't angry enough to fight. I wasn't hopeful enough to rebuild. I was just tired. But somewhere beneath that exhaustion, something else was forming. Not rage, resolve. I didn't know it yet, but I was standing at the edge of a decision that would change the direction of everything. The shift didn't happen all at once. It began with a phone call. My brother called early the next morning, his voice sharper than usual. He asked if I was sitting down. I wasn't. I was standing in the hallway, watching Madison brush her teeth, the ordinary rhythm of morning grounding me just enough. He told me he'd found something, the $75,000 Daniel had transferred. He'd moved it before I ever confronted him, before he knew I was suspicious. The timing mattered. It showed intent, planning, preparation. He didn't just cheat, my brother said quietly. He planned his exit. That sentence landed harder than anything else. Not because it hurt more, but because it erased the last remaining doubt. This wasn't a lapse in judgment. This wasn't a midlife crisis. This was strategy. Later that day, Sophie came into my office holding her phone, her face pale and set. She showed me a message thread, mutual friends asking questions, whispering theories, speculating. Daniel's version of events was spreading, polished and self-pitying. He was painting himself as misunderstood, pushed away, lonely. I felt something solid click into place. That evening, I sat down alone and read the partnership agreement again, slowly, deliberately. I read it not as a wounded wife, but as a co-founder, a mother, a woman who had built something real. For the first time, I stopped reacting. I started choosing. I called my brother and told him to proceed. No more delays. No more protecting Daniel from consequences he'd earned. The next morning, I received a call from Morrison Industries. The CEO herself introduced her name, calm and direct. She told me Rachel Chen no longer worked for the company. Conflicts of interest weren't tolerated. My proposal would be evaluated on merit alone. When I hung up, I didn't smile. I exhaled. That was the moment I realized I hadn't lost power. I'd just stopped sharing it. A few days later, Sophie did something I hadn't expected. She posted the truth, not out of revenge, but out of exhaustion. Her words were raw, honest, and painful to read. She didn't insult her father. She didn't exaggerate. She just told the story as it had happened. When she told me, her voice shook. I couldn't pretend anymore, she said. I was already in the middle. I didn't scold her. I warned her gently that once something goes public, it can't be taken back. That her relationship with her father would change forever. She met my eyes and said, "It already changed when he chose someone else." That night, Daniel called her, screaming, accusing, demanding. Sophie listened silently, then told him calmly not to call again until he was ready to apologize, to me, and actually mean it. She hung up and looked at me, tears streaming. Did I do the right thing? I pulled her into my arms. Yes, I said. You stood up for the truth. That was when I understood something crucial. My children weren't breaking. They were becoming. And so was I. I stopped apologizing for boundaries, stopped softening my voice to make other people comfortable, stopped questioning my instincts. The turning point wasn't a victory. It was acceptance. I accepted that my marriage was over, that Daniel had made his choices, that protecting my children and my integrity mattered more than preserving an illusion. And with that acceptance came something powerful. Calm. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It came in waves, quiet at first, then undeniable. The divorce hearing took place 3 months later, in a courtroom that smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant. I sat beside my brother, hands folded in my lap, posture straight, breathing measured. Across the aisle, Daniel sat with his attorney, a woman known for aggressive tactics and sharp words. They came prepared for war. His attorney painted a story where Daniel was the wounded party, isolated, pushed out of the business, emotionally neglected. She implied I'd manipulated finances, turned the children against him, used my position to punish him for leaving. I didn't react, because facts don't flinch. My brother presented documentation, timelines, receipts, account transfers, the partnership agreement Daniel had signed without reading closely enough. He laid out the affair, the misuse of company funds, the transfer of $75,000 weeks before confrontation. The judge listened without expression. When she asked Daniel directly whether he had used company funds to support an extramarital affair, his attorney tried to object. The judge silenced her with a look. Daniel hesitated, then admitted it. The courtroom shifted. When asked about the money transfer, he argued it was his right, that he'd earned it too. My brother calmly explained the designation of those funds: family relocation, business expansion, documented intent, premeditation. The judge ruled swiftly. 70% of the transferred funds were to be returned immediately to a joint account pending final division. The buyout clause would be enforced exactly as written. Generous, considering the circumstances. Daniel's face went pale. Outside the courtroom, he stopped me. He was crying. He said we could still fix this, that he'd lost everything, that Rachel had been fired, that the future he'd imagined had evaporated. He asked me to have compassion. I told him I did, for our children, for the life he dismantled, but not for the consequences of his choices. That wasn't cruelty. That was clarity. In the weeks that followed, the pieces fell where they always do, according to gravity. Rachel filed for bankruptcy. The company she'd joined paid half of what she once earned. The image Daniel had attached himself to collapsed overnight. Daniel's family grew quieter. His father started showing up for the kids. Wrestling matches, school plays, Sunday dinners. He never defended his son, never asked me to reconcile. One evening, he told me simply that I was a good woman and he was sorry. The company stabilized. Without Daniel's chaos, contracts closed. The Morrison deal went through. 2 more followed. I promoted a senior developer to partner, someone steady, ethical, reliable. We moved to Seattle. The house wasn't extravagant, but it felt peaceful, like air after a storm. Sophie started her freshman year at university, confident and focused. Tyler thrived in his new school, stronger, calmer. Madison made friends quickly and asked about her father less and less. Daniel tried to take me back to court. He lost. By the time 8 months had passed, his presence in our lives had shrunk to something manageable, predictable, distant. And I realized something unexpected. I didn't feel victorious. I felt done. Done carrying his weight. Done explaining myself. Done living inside someone else's shadow. The truth had done what truth always does. It returned everything to its rightful place. 8 months after the divorce was finalized, I stood in the living room of our new home in Seattle, watching the late afternoon light stretch across the hardwood floors. Outside, the mountains sat quietly in the distance, solid, unmoving, indifferent to the chaos humans create and survive. The house felt different, not louder, not fuller, just calmer. Sophie had just come home from campus, dropping her backpack by the door like she owned the place, because she did. Tyler was out with friends, confident in a way that no longer felt forced. Madison sat at the kitchen table, coloring, humming softly, content in a way that told me she felt safe again. That was when I knew we had made it. Not because everything was perfect, but because it was honest. The business had survived, more than survived. Without the secrecy, without the divided loyalty, it grew. I stopped bracing myself for betrayal. I started trusting my instincts again. Daniel faded into the background of our lives. Not erased, just redefined. He was no longer the center. He was a chapter, and I stopped hating him long before I stopped thinking about him. Eventually, I didn't think about him at all. I thought about the woman I had been when this started, the one who stood in her kitchen, smelling unfamiliar cologne and wondering if she was imagining things. The woman who doubted herself, who softened her truth to keep peace, who believed love could survive without respect. I wish I could reach back and tell her this. Your world isn't ending, it's clearing. Betrayal doesn't destroy you. It reveals what was already broken. And when you stop protecting someone from the consequences of their actions, you give yourself room to heal. My children watched me walk away, not in anger, not in revenge, but in integrity. They learned that honesty matters, that boundaries matter, that love without respect is not love at all. I didn't rebuild my life out of spite. I rebuilt it out of self-respect. And in doing so, I found something stronger than the marriage I lost. I found myself.